Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Dominic Low, a curator at the Asian Civilisations Museum. Welcome to the 11th ACM talk titled Bead Netting and Plaiting Techniques in the Peranakan World. ACMtalks is a webinar series bringing leading scholars in conversation with curators at the ACM to explore our core curatorial themes. That is maritime trade, faith and belief, materials and design, and Peranakan art and culture. I thank the Chris Foundation for their generous support. Today's session will be recorded and made available on our ACM Facebook page. We will take questions from the audience later on in the program, so please feel free to type in any questions you have during the talk in the Q&A chat box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We are very fortunate to have with us today Valerie Hector. Valerie received her BA in English Literature at Loyola University of Chicago. She spent 2 years in the anthropology PhD program at the University of Chicago, where she returned in 2010 through the Graham School. An award-winning art jeweler and independent beadwork historian based in Chicago, Valerie published The Art of Beadwork, Historic Inspiration, Contemporary Design in 2005. Her scholarly articles include bead netting and plaiting techniques in the Peranakan World, and most recently, a beaded hair comb of the early Ming Dynasty. I'm sure you're all as excited as I am to hear from Valerie. So without further ado, Valerie, please.
Thank you, Dominic. I'm very happy to be here. I'll say it again. Thank you, Dominic. I'm very happy to be here. I can't wait to hear your questions, and I'm honored to be asked to do this. I want to give you a sense of where I'm speaking to you from. And I am in snowy Chicago. We're supposed to have a blizzard today. Supposedly we had a blizzard last night, and I haven't looked outdoors yet, but it could be a lot of snow on the ground. So I'm happy to be connecting with you there in warm, and I think probably very sunny Singapore. Maybe not this evening, but tomorrow. So my talk is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is what Peranakan beadworkers share with beaders around the world. Part 2 is Peranakan innovations in bead plating and netting techniques. Part 3 is innovations, negotiating with tradition. Part 4 is directions for further research. So I'd like to begin with a question. What do Peranakan beadworkers share with beadworkers around the world? And I know a lot of you will already know the answer before I reveal the answer. There's my hint, my clue to you is patterns. They share certain kinds of patterns in their beadwork. This is what Peranakan beadworkers share with beadworkers of ancient Egypt as early as 2400 BC. The dresses like the one on the right, bead net dresses were being made, and women were wearing them apparently over linen undergarments or linen tunics. And these dresses show this very distinctive kind of patterning that interests us here. It's what Peranakan beadworkers share with the beadworkers of Africa, all over Africa. These same kinds of patterns appear. Here we have Nelson Mandela wearing a beaded collar distinctive of his people, the Xhosa. It's what Peranakan beadworkers share with beadworkers of China, beadworkers of the imperial court, who were probably jewelers, doubled as jewelers. And here's Empress Dowager Cixi wearing a cape, I guess we would call it, made of very large pearls, united in these distinctive patterns. And it's also what Peranakan beadworkers share with vernacular beadworkers of China. So everyday people of China have used these distinctive patterns as well. Here are 2 beaded shop signs. These would have hung in front of shops in Beijing in the 20th century and possibly earlier too. Very distinctive patterns in the beadwork. It's also what Peranakan beadworkers have in common with beadworkers of 17th century England, represented by this anonymous young lady here at the left, depicted in this painting. It's she and others of her social class and level of wealth would have made beaded baskets just like this one densely, profusely beaded in different beading techniques. So these are called christening baskets. They appear only really during the 17th century in this format, in this beaded format, the later 17th century. So around 1660 or so. And supposedly they were used to hold the elements of a baby, a newborn baby's layette during the christening ceremony. No one knows if they were actually used or not, or just made as emblems of a happy event. So my slides are skipping a little bit here. There's a certain lag, and I apologize for that. Well, all right. It's also what Peranakan beadworkers have in common with beadworkers of India. Beadworkers such as these young ladies here, tribal beadworkers of Western India, made pieces of this sort. Hopefully my slide will go forward here. Junhao, are you able to skip to the next slide? Thank you very much.
Sure. All right.
And may I ask you to, when I'm ready for the next slide, and you can provide it? Okay, very good. That's what we're going to do.
Okay.
Made pieces of this sort here, depicting beautiful scenes from everyday life, and also occasionally representing gods and goddesses. Okay, next. Very good. It's also what Peranakan beadworkers have in common with beadworkers of the Sadan Toraja people of Sulawesi. So we see a man here on the right rendering a beadwork ornament, which resembles an umbrella, would have been hung in front of a family home and lineage home on a ceremonial occasion. And it left, this is an example of the piece here, rendered in these very distinctive patterns. Next, please. And finally, it's what Peranakan beadworkers share with the beadworkers of the Dayak peoples of Borneo. Here, 4 beautiful young girls wearing beautiful pieces rendered in these patterns. Next. And here's the answer, which you already know. Peranakan beadworkers had an affinity for creating open diamond patterns in their beads. So RHOMB, RHOMB patterns, but I think it's easier to just call them diamond patterns. Next. Peranakan beadworkers knew how to render these open diamond patterns flat, so in 2 dimensions, as we see here on the very upper top portion of this bed panel. And they also knew how to render them in 3 dimensions. So the tassel tops, the rounded tops of these tassels are beaded in a 3-dimensional open diamond plate. Next. There are different ways of making these open diamond patterns in beads. I'm just going to talk about 2 of them here, the most common ones. The one on the left is the one many beadworkers around the world learn first. It's very easy, it's very fast. It operates with just 1 thread. When the thread wears out, you add a new thread. And so I've called it a net. Now, it's wonderful, it's efficient. However, if one of these threads breaks, the piece is going to keep unraveling because there's only 1 thread. Now, on the right, we have an open diamond plate. This is a much more stable, enduring, long-lasting type of technique. It's far more labor-intensive in that you take 2 threads and then you unite 1 bead. So it operates basically 1 or 2 or 3 beads at a time. It's very slow, but if one of these threads breaks, it really doesn't matter because there are so many other threads. Next. And I think human beings may have some kind of affinity for open diamond patterns going a long way back. That's one explanation anyway. Here we have a tiny pottery shard on the upper left, a piece of ceramic that got embedded with a textile imprint. And archaeologists who have reconstructed what this textile would have looked like discovered that it was a knotted net with open diamond cells. Very interesting. And this piece, this ceramic shard, was recovered from a site about 100 miles southeast of Moscow. And it dates to the Eurasian Upper Paleolithic, around 15,000 to 20,000 BC, quite a long time ago. So there's a reason why open diamond patterns in beads appear all around the world. It's not the case that, they spread by diffusion. It's probably that they were invented independently in many different cultures. Next. I believe, from what I have been able to study so far, the Peranakan beadworkers had a distinct preference for open diamond plates as opposed to nets. And a piece here on the right shows one of these plates in progress. This is incredibly difficult to sit down and face a piece like this, knowing you've finished a few inches and you have a great many inches to go. But it's a beautiful, long-lasting approach to making a piece like this. It's never going to fall apart. It's going to last decades, perhaps a lot longer than that. Okay, next. Here we have a close-up detail of this piece. You can see that the beader was working over a pattern and she was rendering the pattern beautifully. She's an expert, she's meticulous, and she's doing a beautiful, beautiful job, but she has a long way to go. I would guess that she could unite maybe 100, 200, maybe 300 beads in one day before her back gave out, or her eyes gave out, or her hands gave out. Next. Now, Peranakan beadworkers apparently also knew, some of them, how to create closed diamond plates. As we see on the left here, this technique could be understood as a closed diamond plate. But Peranakan beadworkers rarely use this kind of closed diamond plate or net. And I don't know why, but one guess is that when they wanted a dense effect in their beads, as opposed to an open or diaphanous effect, they just used embroidery, bead embroidery. The two tassels on the right, if you look into the upper portions where there's a green background, those beads are sewn onto fabric, one bead at a time. And I think that Peranakan beadworkers opted for embroidering beads instead of generating closed diamond nets. Next. Oh, and now we get to talk about innovations. We've seen what Peranakan beadworkers have in common with beadworkers all around the world, and now we're going to see what they did that no one else did. Next. I'm going to show 3 innovative plates incorporating diamond patterns, each quite distinct, each beautiful in its own way. Next. Here's the first one. This is a curtain tie in 3 registers. The top register is embroidery. Couldn't be more beautiful or more beautifully rendered. The middle portion is an open diamond, probably a plate, almost certainly a plate. And it's the bottom portion that interests us now, this tassels. Next. Here's a detail shot of these tassels. And we can see that they're all interconnected. This is a lush, 3-dimensional approach to creating tassels. It would have been much easier for this beadworker to just string individual strands of beads, would have finished in a very small portion of the time it took to invent and then render this very sophisticated approach to tassels. Next. It left a diagram of this technique showing that it may look, if we look on the right, it may look kind of simple and straightforward, but it isn't. It's very advanced, very highly evolved, where they're switching back and forth to where the connections are made. Next. And here's our second example of an innovative plate that features open diamond patterns. Next. And on the left, a detail of this piece where we can see kind of rectangular and medallions, dense areas, alternating with open areas. On the right, here's a diagram of this technique. Again, very sophisticated, very highly evolved. You know, from my point of view, these are advances in human technology, in the history of technology, which are typically dismissed as just beadwork techniques. Well, these reflect a lot of thought and a lot of expertise. Next, please. And it was Dr. Huifeng Xie, whom I think many of you know, who figured out the derivation of this technique on the right. It was she who figured out that probably it came from macrame. On the left, we have a piece of knotting macrame rendered in knots that look an awful lot like the beadwork patterns on the right. And I think Dr. Xie is completely correct. So what does this tell us? What does this suggest? It suggests that Peranakan beadworkers were transposing ideas from one kind of needleworking technique to another kind. Again, another really sophisticated development in beadwork technology. Next. And as long as I mentioned Dr. Xie, I want to call your attention to two of her many publications on the history of Peranakan beadwork. Without her, in my opinion, the world would be a lot poorer, and Peranakan beadworkers would never have been honored in the way she's honored them by documenting their many achievements. Next. And here's our final example of an innovation that incorporates open diamond patterns. The most complicated technique of all that we're seeing today, really a merging of two distinct techniques that actually appear close together on the bead net dress we looked at, dating to about 2400 BC in Egypt. But the Egyptians never merged them into a single technique. Next. Here's a diagram of this technique. As I said, it's really two distinct techniques that are ancient, that have been brought together here. And I don't know who figured this out, that this could work. But again, this represents enormous thought, probably a lot of experimentation. It didn't just come about. It had to be achieved, right, through a lot of effort. Next. And so when I went to reconstruct this technique to try and figure out how to do it, on the upper image, you see I had an iron bar. It's about 3 feet across or so, about 1 meter across. And then I strung some strong threads or rope or twine over the bar. And then I got some wooden beads, raw wooden beads, and then I painted them in the colors of this piece. And then I tried to make this technique. And I made a lot of mistakes, but eventually I got it. Now here's the problem. As I was working on the left side of the piece, the right side was unraveling because these medallions, these diamond-shaped dense medallions here, there's nothing holding them together. There's not enough tension, not enough thread tension to keep them together. So I do not know if I had trouble in the large beads I was using, how much trouble did the Peranakan beadworkers have in the tiny beads they were using to get these medallions, these closed diamond medallions to function, to look beautiful. I don't know. It's an amazing achievement to me. Next. And then we're going to look at two innovations featuring non-diamond patterns. Also brilliant achievements in their own right. Next. And the first one is this beautiful panel here where the entire center portion is worked in an open diamond plate, almost certainly a plate. And the edges at the left and the right are worked in a more open, more diaphanous fringe, a completely different technique. Next. There's a detail at right of this technique. There are two denser bands alternating with two or three less dense bands. I have interpreted the denser bands as conveying interlocking coin motifs. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. And the fact that this fringe is worked in glass beads that are lined with gold, some kind of gold, I don't know what carat, but these are very expensive beads. I'm fairly sure it's not an accident that these beads were chosen to represent these interlocking coin motifs, indicative or which convey wishes for prosperity and abundance. Very auspicious motifs in Chinese culture, in Peranakan culture. And at the upper left, we have a small, I think it's a table or a stool or a chair featuring interlocking coin motifs, very common in Chinese and Peranakan, I think, visual culture. So it's entirely possible that beadworkers wanted to render these motifs in their beads. Again, a very difficult, highly evolved approach to creating a fringe. Next. At the left, a diagram of this technique. I think it makes the technique look easier than it actually is when you sit down to do it. Next. And so I asked myself, where else in Chinese visual culture in the beadwork might we have interlocking coin motifs? And the answer is on these bamboo bead garments, such as the one at the right, very beautiful, made of thousands and thousands of tiny bamboo beads, united with knotting. This is a knotted net, a knotted open diamond net for the most part. This particular garment on the right doesn't have any interlocking coin motifs on it. However, a detail at the upper left corner of a different garment does have these interlocking coin motifs. Very beautiful, complex, the result of a lot of thought and a lot of experimentation. Next. However, when we put the Peranakan version of interlocking coin motifs together with the mainland Chinese version of interlocking coin motifs, there is no structural resemblance, and there really isn't any visual resemblance either, which is to say that the Peranakans invented something completely new in the history of beadwork. In a way, it's probably more complicated than the mainland Chinese version at the right. Next. And our second example of an innovative technique that doesn't include diamond patterns, but moves on from them. Next. Here's a detail of this technique where we see pairs of beads kind of stacked on each other, leaving open spaces between the stacks. And what's being rendered here is this beautiful vase featuring two finger citron. And from my point of view, you shouldn't be able to render a figurative motif this elegantly in this technique. I won't go into details, but it's counterintuitive. But the Peranakan beadworkers did it anyway. Next. And here's a diagram of this technique. I called it an open square stitch net. It operates with a single thread. So if one of these threads breaks, the piece starts to unravel. Why did the Peranakan beadworkers opt for this technique? I don't know. It's an innovation. Maybe that's answer enough. It is structurally unsound from my point of view because the pairs of beads are not connected well enough to keep this piece in good condition for many years. But Peranakan beadworkers knew that these pieces were not going to take heavy use, that they were made for the most part to celebrate weddings and in honor of weddings. So it's okay that this piece was a little bit fragile. Okay, next. And now, moving to part 3, I'd like to talk about innovations appearing in the context of tradition and how innovation manages to negotiate with tradition, paying respects, but going on, moving beyond tradition. Next. And I'm defining tradition here as an open diamond plate, or perhaps an open diamond net, because they are pervasive in Peranakan beadwork. So if you look through any book on Peranakan beadwork, you'll see over and over again the presence of these open diamond patterns. So I think it's fair to define them as tradition or traditional without getting into the details or definitions of what tradition means. Next. You know, we saw this piece before, this beautiful panel, where the center portion, the large rectangular center portion, is rendered in what we would call this traditional technique of an open diamond plate, almost certainly a plate. And the edges at the left and the right, the fringes rendered in these costly gold beads or crystal beads, glass beads with gold interiors, are rendered in this incredibly innovative interlocking coin plate. Next. And here's a detail. At the left, we see the open diamond plate. And in the middle, the open diamond plate approach used to create these curvilinear scallops, incredibly beautiful. And on the right, the interlocking coin plate. Next. And if we had to graph this, if we had to represent this simply in visual ways, we would say that tradition at the left occupies about 80% of this piece, give or take, and innovation is given about 20% of the piece or so. And I would interpret this as an innovation negotiating with tradition, saying, you know, we'd like to be present if it's okay with you, because, you know, we have something to offer. What we have to offer is even more sumptuousness and visual richness than you, tradition, can provide alone. And tradition very graciously accommodates innovation, and they blend together into a beautiful whole. Next. And we saw this piece earlier too, this panel. What's going on here is just the opposite. Innovation takes up by far the most part of this panel, the entire central portion of this panel, roughly 80%, maybe more. And tradition is given just a little bit. Tradition, meaning the open diamond plate, appears in the perimeter, the red dotted with white perimeter of this piece. So tradition encloses innovation, sets the bounds or provides the boundaries for innovation here, in effect. Next. And here again, another more graphic representation of innovation on the left, taking up most of the piece, and tradition on the right, getting just a little bit. It's present, but you know, it's on the boundaries, or it sets the boundaries. Next. And now, you know, in closing, I'd like to suggest directions for further research. It's my great hope that someone, maybe one of you in our audience, or someone else in the future, will research this material in greater depth. Next. Here's a genre of pieces that needs research, these beaded hanging tassels or hanging ornaments, full of innovative techniques that do incorporate open diamond patterns, but also move on from them. So you can see at the left, the beadworker is actually plaiting 2 strands of beads together to form this knot. And in the center, this central vertical cartouche are open diamond patterns. And on the right, a very complicated, almost certainly a net, a single thread approach, doing all sorts of amazing things sort of with a few open diamonds present, but not many. Next. And this kind of piece also needs further research. An amazing, enormous panel, about 53 inches square, so about 1.3 meters square or so, in multicolors, a very sort of a free form approach to color here. And on the right, we can see that this might be what someone thought of as bead lace, what Peranakan beadworkers were transposing techniques and concepts from lace making into beads, because of course, Peranakan beadworkers also knew other needleworking techniques, and so they could have made this kind of transposition and made it work beautifully. So this genre of pieces needs further research, and if any of you have come across other examples, please let Dominic know. Please email the Asian Civilisations Museum, let them know, so that research can advance. Next. And finally, a third direction for further research. Dr. Chea has documented these valances on the left, which combine embroidery with other forms of needlework and also beadwork. They occur in Perak state of peninsular Malaysia. They're sumptuous, they're beautiful, and they include beadworking techniques that have not yet really been documented. Now, when I look at the piece on the left, when I look at the trefoil cartouches that are full of beadwork, kind of the upper register of the beadwork, what I see is China. I see a mainland Chinese beading technique, or a descendant of a mainland Chinese beading technique, represented on the right in this beaded panel from China, which actually bears a tiny sticker saying China, which means it was exported probably in the late 19th century or after that, after the McKinley-Coliff Tariff Act was instituted. And I think it was that, I can't remember the exact date. Anyway, late 19th century on the right. Is it the case that mainland Chinese beadworkers were over in Perak state, using what they knew? Or is this still yet another Peranakan innovation on the left? This too needs research. And I hope that future generations will take a look at this, take an interest in this. Next. And so this brings my presentation to a close. I want to thank you for listening and spending part of your evening here with me and with us. And I welcome your questions. I know they'll be very interesting and that I'll learn a lot. So please, questions.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for the very beautiful exploration of the innovation, craftsmanship, and cross-cultural influences manifested by netted and plaited examples of Nyonya needlework. I am so grateful to Valerie for giving all of us an in-depth look at the technique of netted and plaited beadwork, and I hope to complement the presentation by picking out some interesting pieces from the Peranakan Museum's collection of Nyonya needlework, which reveal the roles these beautiful textiles played in the lives of the Peranakans. Yep, and so I would like to preface the following slides by saying that Nyonya needlework as a category encompasses embroideries made by or made to the tastes of the various Peranakan communities, that is mixed communities in island Southeast Asia that grew from intermarriages between indigenous women and immigrant men at the beginning, be they Arab, European, Chinese, or Indian. Over the centuries, these various Peranakan communities fostered distinctive hybrid cultures rooted in Southeast Asia. Ranging from slippers to large door curtains, Nyonya needlework functioned as gifts, dress accessories, and most prominently, decorative textiles for major celebrations. Today's selection focuses on just one aspect, that of the Peranakan Chinese wedding celebrations, as a response to the pieces Valerie explored earlier on. Which is so, for example, gifts were exchanged between the families of the betrothed couple in a gift exchange ceremony known as lap chai. A fan for the groom was one of these gifts, which he would use in the course of the wedding celebrations, such as during the procession, which you can see in this following photograph. So typically, the fan would have been wrapped in a red silk handkerchief. So this beaded fan cover would thus be an elaborate alternative, as many of us who love Nyonya needlework would know that this is very typical of the aesthetic of Peranakan beadwork and needlework. Let's change the slide. So valances and door curtains are some of the, or rather among the largest examples of Nyonya needlework made for or used by the Peranakans for the wedding celebrations. This set would have decorated a doorway to a wedding chamber and provided a certain measure of privacy to the couple. What resembles a tree of life, as you can see, is flanked by phoenixes, a symbol of peace and prosperity, and a common motif recurring across Nyonya needlework in general, and of course beyond that as well in other media. And also lions. And this image of a lion playing a ball is also another auspicious image that you would find, for example, on batik toques that come from Java. The technique here, as opposed to the knitted and plaited beadwork embroidery, the beadwork that we saw in Valerie's talk, is flat gold embroidery. So in this case, the gold threads are actually laid onto the surface and then couched onto the surface. So as you saw earlier in Valerie's talk, with knitted and plaited examples, you don't require a surface on which the beads would be couched upon. Another beautiful example would be this. And this is a panel. This size of the panel would indicate that it might have been used as a pillow decoration for the Chinese Peranakan bridal bed in the wedding chamber. The bridal bed was vitally important because it was a place of conception for the next generation of the families. And it had to be ritually purified and charged with positive energies, hence the auspicious figures and auspicious symbols that dominate the space. And of course, the need to protect the space from dangerous and malevolent forces. So the wedding chamber was a room in the bride's house that was used by the couple during the traditional 12-day wedding ceremonies. And a wide variety of materials and decorative techniques, are featured here. So for example, you see silk velvet worked with glassy beads and couched, or rather fastened with small stitches. So couched with small rows and stitched at a few at a time. Metal pearl cutwork, sequins fastened with metal pearl, braided and couched metal thread, couched cordonette, and edges bound with needle weaving and metal thread, achieving this quality of fineness or alus that is prized by the Peranakans. And of course, a crowd favorite. Oh, before I go there, I just want to show an image of the wedding bed, as you can see behind the sitters of this photograph. And of course, this crowd favorite for those who visited the Peranakan Museum before we closed for renovations. This beaded cover was probably used to decorate a table and probably the chuntok or spring table for those families whose chuntok was a circular table. Of course, the chuntok could also be a longer rectangular table, which is the other kind of tables that they would have used as a chuntok. And this table would be placed within the wedding chamber, opposite the wedding bed. And it is by the chuntok that the makan chuntok took place. And that is the first meal shared by the bridal couple as husband and wife. Prized silver and porcelain wares would be arrayed on the table, as well as the 12 dishes that were traditionally prepared for the ceremony. This cover, as many of you would know, is made up actually of over a million small glass beads. And some are faceted. A variety of birds, insects, and flowers native to Asia, Europe, and South America even are set against a turquoise ground, which is a popular shade in Peranakan needlework from Penang. Roses are also common because of their resemblance to peonies, a traditional symbol of wealth, honor, and love. And the motifs, of course, oriented in such a way that it can be viewed on all sides, which would make a lot of sense if this particular tablecloth was used as a cover for the circular trim top. The motifs itself, they're probably based on Berlin wool work patterns. So in the same thread as Valerie mentioned during a talk about influences coming from across the world and how Peranakan communities were very open and receptive to these influences. Berlin wool work patterns, for example, was very popular in Europe and also available in Singapore in the 19th century. And here the technique used, a petit point, a stitch, which is again different from, for example, the surface couching that I mentioned earlier. They used full thread. And with netted beadwork, as I mentioned, thread has to be passed through the beads without a need for underlying fabric. And with petit point stitch, you require that surface. And so in a way, it's I guess arguably simpler and more easy to control the process as compared to netted or plaited beadwork, as Valerie pointed out earlier on. And finally, nonia work is also fashion and not just decorative textiles. So the kasut manik would be a very common example of this. And of course, many of us would know that kasut manik is Baba Malay for beaded slippers worn by Peranakan women with the sarong kebaya. And most Peranakans would agree that the kasut manik developed in the 1920s, replacing earlier embroidered slippers, which were often embroidered with gold thread. And slippers, one of the wedding items, of course, purchased or sewn by the bride, her family, or made on commission for use in her wedding. In Penang, for example, some wealthy families had special slipper cupboards for displaying large numbers of kasut maniks. Most kasut maniks found in Peranakan homes today were made using old rokai beads that sadly are no longer in production. And these small seed beads were, of course, made in Europe, particularly in Venice, Lyon, and Bohemia. Known as manik potong or cut beads to Peranakans. These glass beads were sometimes faceted, and from oral history accounts, we know that the beads were purchased locally from a peddler known as the Glentong man, or from specialized shops. And of course, these would have been the middlemen. These beads would have been imported from elsewhere across the globe. Slipper faces were then sewn and it's sent to shoemakers to be made into kasut manik, as you see on the screen. Now, as the popularity of these slippers grew, of course, Peranakan women began wearing them on other occasions other than weddings. And so today it remains a very fashionable way of embracing Peranakan culture, as I'm sure many of our attendees already do. So with that, I'd like to proceed on to the Q&A session. I'd just like to make a mention that some of these pieces that you see in my slides or in Valerie's presentation, these will be made available, or rather will be on display at the new the revamped Peranakan Museum when it reopens in the first half of 2023. So I look forward to welcoming you all then. So without further ado, let's proceed on to the Q&A session. Jinhao, could you please?
You can take the Q&A questions already.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have quite a few questions to get through. So for example, Dr. Lai, thank you for joining us. He mentions, hi Valerie, thank you for your very interesting and educational talk. Many of the netted and beadwork patterns and techniques are very similar, especially for the Penang pieces. May I ask whether, in your opinion, these pieces were domestically or commercially done? And hope to meet you up one day.
Thank you for your question, Dr. Lai. I wish I could answer it, but I can't. And, you know, I haven't done enough research to say yes or no. There's no question in my mind. The Peranakan beadworkers, meaning Nyonyas, rendered a lot of these pieces on their own, you know, using the open diamond plating techniques or other techniques, experimenting to create totally new techniques. No question that they were in operation and loving what they made and doing it pervasively. But the question does arise, you know, and I think that Dr. Chea has established that there were commercial beadworkers making beadwork for sale as early as the late 19th century. think Dr. Chea in her book Phoenix Rising mentions a Hadrami, a beadworker of a woman of Hadrami heritage, offering pieces for sale. So it's possible that, women were offering them for sale. It's possible that, beadworkers were coming in possibly from China and using their expertise and their knowledge to create an even richer blend of techniques. So the answer is, I'm not sure. It needs further research. It's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Dr. Lai. We have another question from Jacinta. Hi, Valerie. Could you enlighten us how the tension is maintained to keep the complex beadwork motifs aligned as they are not secured to a ground grid? Thanks.
Thank you, Jacinta. Well, in some techniques cooperate with you. They want you to succeed, and they help you succeed because they help you maintain even tension. And, if you've done a lot of beadwork as an experienced beadworker, it's easier to maintain even tension. But then there are techniques like that lateral ladder plait that don't cooperate with you, that actually try to make your life harder. So as you're working on one portion, the other portion is unraveling. And how do you keep the tension even? You just keep cinching the threads up. You keep pulling on the threads over and over to get the tension to cooperate. And so it's a more, I think, labor-intensive process. It can be done. It's just a question of which technique you're using. Next.
Okay. Thank you, Jacinta, for a very interesting question. On a related note, HC would like to ask, would the Chinese beadwork examples you examined have been done with multiple threads as well, rather than as netting? And was the bamboo bead jacket also a net with a single thread, or made with multiple threads, perhaps for durability?
Yes, another great question, HC. I did obtain a fragment of a mainland Chinese bamboo bead jacket once years ago. And I wanted to answer this question too. Is it a single thread technique or is it a multiple thread technique? So I cut into it. And as far as I could establish, it's definitely a single thread net. And I think, that would make it easier. And the fact that there are knots, periodic knots, would prevent the piece from unraveling if it were to come apart, during wear, because of course these pieces were worn and they did receive a certain amount of wear. So as far as I can tell, these are single thread knotted netting techniques, rendering the bamboo bead jackets. Thank you for that question.
Yes, Valerie mentioned during our conversations that she had to cut into some of these pieces because it's just so difficult to investigate just by looking at these objects. Valerie, I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit more about, your investigative process to kind of, because all these beautiful drawings that you've made, I'm sure they're very difficult to come up with. It must have taken years of study. Could you tell us and share a bit more about how you went about doing that?
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. It's a question of reverse engineering, a technique, and very often I would just get some wooden beads and then paint them in the colors of the piece I was trying to analyze, and then just do a lot of trial and error to reconstruct the technique. And sometimes I made the stupidest mistakes, and I would look at it like, what am I not paying attention? But it's part of the process, of getting better and better at a technique until you can do it as the Peranakans did it, without any flaws at all, just, masterfully. So it's trial and error. It's being resourceful. It's just finding answers to the questions little by little, not knowing what the answer is, keeping an open mind.
And I'm sure the size of the beads must have made a big impact as well in the process of making, because the glass seed beads that we usually find with Nonia needlework, they tend to be very small, usually more often than not less than 1 mm in diameter. So I imagine it'd be very difficult to kind of control the entire process.
Yeah, it is. My attempts at reconstruction are pursued with larger wooden beads, where it's true that the tension slips away more easily. But it does make it easier to keep track of which bead is going where, and the larger patterns that are being built. So it would have been harder, I'm sure, for Peranakan beadworkers using much tinier beads to render these very complex techniques. But they did it beautifully, you know?
Yes, yes, they have. And actually, Gwen has a wonderful question as well. Gwen asks, hi, Valerie, thank you for sharing. Have you come across any templates where designs were copied and reproduced in multiple pieces?
Yeah, Gwen, another great question. I have not, but then this is not a field that I've been actively researching in. And I would imagine that if you could ask Dr. Chea this question, maybe she's come across templates. I don't know. Templates are probably made of what, paper, I'm going to guess. And so they're more fragile. They're more subject to falling apart and then getting thrown out. So I have come across templates for embroidery, Chinese embroideries. So small Chinese books in paper, providing templates for Chinese embroideries. Those definitely existed. They may have existed among the Peranakan too. I don't know, but no, I never have come across templates. No.
Yes, I'm sure Hui Fen would be able to talk more about it. I think in her book, both Nona Needlework and Phoenix Rising, she did talk about some of these templates, and also in a very important special exhibition at Peranakan Museum, Nona Needlework. That was a very popular exhibition, and Hui Fen also selected some templates to be displayed in that special exhibition. We have another question from HC. And another excellent question. He's asking, so interesting, thank you. Were the other cultures making bead lace at the same time? I guess it's also thinking in terms of the connections with, say, Europe or with the other communities who lived in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, HC, another great question. I have not come across examples of beaded lace in Europe or elsewhere. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. But the ones that I've seen, the one or two or several examples that I've seen from the Peranakans are distinct. And they stick in my memory as being possibly unique in the world, but more research needs to be done. I can't give any kind of definitive answer. I haven't done enough research. Beadwork history is generally kind of an underrepresented area. The history of beadwork technique around the world from a global perspective is fairly under-researched. No, it's actually very under-researched. So we have a long way to go before we can make generalizations, of the kind that we'd like to make.
Thank you so much, HC. So actually, on that note of further research that needs to be done, we have our work cut out for us at the Peranakan Museum as well. I guess on that note, I'll bring today's discussion to a close. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions. And I'm sorry that we're not able to get to all of your questions given the limited time available, but it leaves me to thank Valerie again for being so generous and for sharing your insights and research with us this evening. To all our viewers, thank you for joining us, and please help us to improve our ACMtalks webinar experience by scanning the QR code, which will remain on the screen for 2 to 3 minutes. See you all at next month's ACM Talk, and have a very good evening ahead. Take care.